As she pedaled her bicycle through the deserted streets, the only sound being the soft whir of her tires on the worn asphalt, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It wasn't paranoia, not exactly. It was more like a twitching of the senses, a prickling of the skin on the back of her neck. She glanced over her shoulder, but the streets were empty, the only movement coming from the fluttering leaves of the trees that lined the sidewalk. She picked up speed, the wind whipping her ponytail back and forth as she rode past the dark, looming houses, their windows like empty eyes staring back at her. The air was heavy with the scent of blooming flowers and something else, something sweet and slightly decaying. Evelyn's stomach twisted uneasily as she rode farther into the heart of town, the streets growing increasingly deserted and forlorn. She was running late, had overslept after a night of restless dreams and fragmented images. Now she was racing against time to get to the library, to return the books that were due today. The librarian, Mrs. Crowley, was notorious for her sternness, her displeasure at late returns. Evelyn didn't want to face her wrath, not today, not when her nerves were already stretched taut as a bowstring. As she turned a corner, the library came into view, its stone facade glowering down at her like a disapproving parent. Evelyn's heart sank, and she felt that twitching sense of being watched grow stronger, the skin on the back of her neck crawling with unease. Something was off, something that made her want to turn her bike around and ride in the opposite direction, as fast and as far as she could, but she didn't. She slowed to a stop in front of the library, her eyes scanning the deserted parking lot. The building seemed to loom over her, its Gothic spires reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. The air seemed to vibrate with an ominous energy, as if the very stones of the library were humming with a malevolent power. Evelyn dismounted her bike, her eyes darting nervously around the empty lot. She locked her bike to the rack, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched the overdue books to her chest. As she pushed through the heavy wooden doors, a musty smell wafted out, carrying with it whispers of old knowledge and forgotten secrets. Inside, the library was dim and silent, the only sound the soft rustle of pages turning somewhere in the stacks. Evelyn's eyes adjusted slowly to the gloom, and she made her way to the circulation desk, where Mrs. Crowley sat, her face a mask of disapproving stone. The librarian looked up, her eyes narrowing as she took in Evelyn's flushed face and disheveled hair. "Late again, miss?" she began, her voice like a rusty gate. Evelyn nodded, trying to speak, but her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Sorry, Mrs. Crowley. I overslept." Mrs. Crowley's gaze lingered on Evelyn, her eyes probing, as if searching for some hidden truth. "Very well," she said finally, her voice dripping with disapproval. "But be warned, miss, next time you're late, there will be consequences." As Evelyn handed over the books, her fingers brushed against Mrs. Crowley's, and a shiver ran down her spine. It was as if the librarian's touch had awakened something, a dark and ancient power that slumbered beneath the library's stones, something that stirred, like a sleeper awakening from a long, dark slumber. Evelyn felt it, a creeping sense of dread that seeped into her bones like cold water. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught on a book lying open on the circulation desk, its pages fluttering as if stirred by an unseen breeze. The words danced before her eyes, a language she couldn't understand, the letters twisting and writhing like serpents. Mrs. Crowley's hand reached out, her fingers closing over the book like a vice. "None of your concern, miss," she said, her voice low and menacing. Evelyn felt a jolt of fear, her heart racing as she backed away from the desk. She didn't dare ask what the book was, or what secrets it held. She didn't dare ask anything. As she turned to flee, her eyes met Mrs. Crowley's, and for a moment, Evelyn thought she saw something there, a glimmer of... Was it amusement? No, it was something darker, something that made her skin crawl. The librarian's eyes seemed to hold a warning, a promise of something to come. And then, in an instant, it was gone, replaced by the usual disapproving scowl. Evelyn didn't wait to see what other secrets the librarian might hold. She turned and ran, her footsteps echoing through the silent halls, the soft thud of her sneakers the only sound in the oppressive silence. She burst through the doors, gasping in the bright sunlight, the air fresh and clean after the musty, decaying scent of the library. She didn't dare look back, didn't dare wonder what secrets Mrs. Crowley might be hiding. She just kept running, her heart pounding in her chest, until she was back on her bike, pedaling away from the library as fast as she could, the wind whipping her hair back and forth as she rode, the sun beating down on her face. She didn't dare look back, didn't dare think about what she had seen, what she had felt. As she rode, the streets seemed to blur together, the houses and buildings blending into a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. She didn't notice the streets getting progressively worse, the pavement cracking and crumbling beneath her tires. She didn't notice the houses getting older, the paint peeling off in great strips, the windows like empty eyes staring back at her. She didn't notice the people, either, the ones who watched her from the sidewalks, their faces twisted into cruel grins. All she knew was that she had to get away, had to put as much distance between herself and the library as possible. She pedaled faster, the wind whipping her face, her heart pounding in her chest. And then suddenly she was lost. The streets seemed to twist and turn, leading her deeper into a maze of crumbling buildings and deserted sidewalks. She slowed, her tires squeaking as she came to a stop in front of a house that seemed to loom over her, its windows like empty eyes staring back. Evelyn's heart raced as she looked around, trying to get her bearings. But everything seemed different. The houses and buildings twisted and distorted, as if they had been reflected in a funhouse mirror. She looked up at the house, her eyes drawn to the door, which seemed to be slightly ajar. A cold breeze wafted out, carrying with it the scent of decay and rot. And then, in the silence, she heard a whisper, a soft, raspy voice that seemed to come from all around her. "Welcome home, Evelyn," it said. "You've been expected." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as she stared at the door, her mind racing with the implications. She didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe, as she waited for the voice to speak again. But there was only silence. Her eyes were drawn to the door, her gaze fixed on the narrow crack of darkness that seemed to yawn open like a mouth. She felt an inexplicable pull, as if something inside was beckoning her, urging her to step forward, to cross the threshold into the unknown. Her hand seemed to move of its own accord, reaching out to push the door open, to step into the darkness within. And as she did, the whisper seemed to grow louder, more urgent, the words echoing in her mind like a mantra. "Welcome home, Evelyn. You've been expected." The door creaked, the sound like a sigh, as Evelyn stepped across the threshold, her eyes adjusting slowly to the dim light within. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and something else, something sweet and rotten. She moved deeper into the house, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses heightened as she navigated the dark, twisting corridors. Doors seemed to lead to nowhere, staircases spiraled upwards into darkness, and Evelyn felt herself lost in a maze of forgotten rooms and secret passages. And yet, despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm her, she felt a strange sense of belonging, as if she had finally come home to a place she had never known existed. The voice seemed to whisper agreement, the words echoing in her mind. "Yes, Evelyn, you're home now. You'll never leave." As she moved deeper into the heart of the house, the darkness seemed to coalesce around her, a living, breathing entity that wrapped itself around her like a shroud. And Evelyn knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was trapped, forever bound to the secrets that lurked within these twisted walls, forever bound to the secrets that lurked within these twisted walls. The voice whispered sweet nothings in her ear, the words dripping with malice, as she stumbled through the labyrinthine corridors, her heart pounding in her chest. She thought she saw things moving out of the corner of her eye, shadowy figures that darted away when she turned to look. Doors creaked open by themselves, revealing hidden rooms filled with dusty artifacts and forbidden knowledge. Evelyn felt like she was unraveling, her mind reeling from the sheer weight of the secrets that surrounded her. And yet, she couldn't stop, couldn't turn back. The voice seemed to be drawing her deeper into the very heart of the house. She stumbled, her footfalls echoing through the corridors, as she followed the voice deeper into the darkness. Suddenly, the walls seemed to close in around her, the air thickening with an unholy energy. The voice grew louder, more insistent, the words becoming clearer, more distinct. Evelyn, you've been chosen. You've been chosen to unlock the secrets of the Ancient Ones. As she turned a corner, a door swung open before her, revealing a room filled with ancient artifacts, forbidden knowledge etched into the walls in blood-red script. In the center of the room, a single book lay open on a pedestal, its pages fluttering in a wind that seemed to come from nowhere. Evelyn's eyes were drawn to the book, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt an overwhelming sense of destiny, as if she had been brought to this place, to this moment, for a single purpose, to unlock the secrets of the Ancient Ones. And as she reached out to touch the book, the voice whispered a final, terrible truth in her ear. You'll never be the same again, Evelyn. You'll never be free.